Hello everyone, my name is Charlene. We are now on lesson 3 and we will be learning about the different learner-centered psychological principles. For this lesson, we have 3 learning objectives. First is to discuss about the importance of learning the different learner-centered psychological principles. Second is to identify and differentiate the 14 psychological principles that pertain to the learner and the learning process. And third is to understand and apply each psychological principle to enhance one's own learning process and improve teaching practices. The learner-centered psychological principles were put together by the American Psychological Association. It gives emphasis on psychological factors that are innate in nature to and under the control of the learner rather than the habits or physiological factors. It attempts to give credit to the external environment or contextual factors that interact with the internal factors. There are 14 psychological principles that pertain to the learner and the learning process. The principles are intended to apply to all types of learners, from children, teachers, administrators, parents, and up to members involved in our educational system community. So, what is the learner centered approach? The learner centered approach refers to an approach where students are encouraged to take on more responsibility for their own learning. This also means that teachers take on more responsibility of being facilitators of a broad range of learning experiences rather than being the only source of knowledge for their students. The following are the advantages of using the learner-centered approach. First, it teaches students to think for themselves. It emphasizes the vital skills students need to learn. It encourages students to reflect on how and what they are learning. It allows students to make decisions about what content to learn, and it promotes student-to-student interaction. The 14 principles are divided into 4 categories. We have the cognitive and metacognitive factors, the motivational and affective factors, developmental and social factors, and the individual differences factors. The first category, which is the cognitive and the metacognitive factors, has 6 principles under it. These are the nature of the learning process, goals of the learning process, construction of knowledge, strategic thinking, thinking about thinking, and the context of learning. Cognitive deals with mental processes such as memory, learning, problem solving, attention, and decision making, while metacognitive refers to an awareness and understanding of one's own thought processes. Principle 1 is the nature of the learning process. The learning of complex subject matter is most effective when it is an intentional process of constructing meaning from information and experience. This principle suggests that students are able to successfully learn and understand complex subject matter when they are active, goal-directed, self-regulating, and assume personal responsibility for contributing to their own learning. Principle 2 is the goals of the learning process. The successful learner over time and with support and instructional guidance can create meaningful, coherent representations of knowledge. This principle suggests that students who are successful are goal-oriented. A well-known method that is commonly used in setting a goal is the SMART technique. It is where S stands for specific, M for measurable, A for attainable, R for relevant, and T for time-bound. Principle 3 is the construction of knowledge. The successful learner can link new information with existing knowledge in meaningful ways. Now, the nature of these links can take a variety of forms, such as adding to, modifying, or reorganizing existing knowledge or skills. Principle 4 is strategic thinking. The successful learner can create and use a repertoire of thinking and reasoning strategies to achieve complex learning goals. Strategic thinking is useful for learners when they are trying to learn new concepts, finding ways to improve their reasoning skills, and looking for a solution to a problem. Principle 5 is thinking about thinking. In our previous lesson, we have learned that thinking about thinking refers to metacognition, which is an awareness and understanding of one's own thought processes. This principle states that higher order strategies for selecting and monitoring mental operations facilitate creative and critical thinking. Successful learners are able to reflect on how they think and learn. They set reasonable goals and select appropriate learning strategies or methods. They continuously monitor their progress toward the goals that they have set. Principle 6 is the context of learning. Learning is influenced by environmental factors, including culture, technology, and instructional practices. Cultural influences on students can impact their motivation, orientation toward learning, and ways of thinking. Technologies and instructional practices must be appropriate for the learner's level of prior knowledge, cognitive abilities, and their learning and thinking strategies. The next category is the motivational and affective factors. It has three principles, namely the motivational and emotional influences on learning, the intrinsic motivation to learn, and the effects of motivation on effort. Principle 7 is the motivational and emotional influences on learning. It states that what and how much is learned is influenced by the motivation. Motivation to learn, in turn, is influenced by the individual's emotional states, beliefs, interests and goals, and habits of thinking. So, in other words, when a learner is motivated, he or she goes the extra mile and strives to achieve excellence. Because of this, the student is able to learn more, especially if he or she believes in his or her ability to achieve the goal, and if what is being learned is personally relevant and interesting to him or her. Principle 8 is the intrinsic motivation to learn. The learner's creativity, higher order thinking, and natural curiosity all contribute to motivation to learn. Intrinsic motivation is stimulated by tasks of optimal novelty and difficulty, relevant to personal interest, and providing for personal choice and control. Intrinsic motivation comes from within. When you are intrinsically motivated, you are engaged in an activity because it is enjoyable and interesting to you, and you get personal satisfaction from doing it. Principle 9 is the effects of motivation on effort. Acquisition of complex knowledge and skills requires extended learner effort and guided practice. Without learners' motivation to learn, the willingness to exert the effort is unlikely without coercion. That is why, as instructors, we should continuously motivate our learners by incorporating purposeful learning activities and finding ways to make the subject or topic more interesting and personally relevant to them. The third category is the developmental and social factors. Under that are the principles, including developmental influences on learning and the social influences on learning. Principle 10 is the developmental influences on learning. As individuals develop, there are different opportunities and constraints for learning. Learning is most effective when differential development within and across physical, intellectual, emotional, and social domains is taken into account. This principle suggests that individuals learn best when the material being taught is appropriate to their developmental level and is presented in an enjoyable and interesting way. Next, we have Principle 11, which is the social influences on learning. Learning is influenced by social interactions, interpersonal relations, and communication with others. When students are given more opportunities to interact and to collaborate with others on instructional tasks, it greatly enhances their learning. The next category is the individual differences factors. There are three principles under it. We have the individual differences in learning, learning and diversity, and the standards and assessment. Principle 12 is the individual differences in learning. Learners have different strategies, approaches, and capabilities for learning that are a function of prior experience and heredity. Individuals are born with and develop their own capabilities and talents. Through learning and social acculturation, they have acquired their own preferences for how they like to learn and at the pace for which they learn. For example, we have learners of different learning styles. We have auditory learners, we have visual learners, and we have kinesthetic learners. Principle 13 is learning and diversity. Learning is most effective when differences in learners' linguistic, cultural, and social backgrounds are taken into account. Diversity in the classroom fosters creativity, it increases cultural awareness, develops respect for culturally unique individuals, and provides the opportunity to gain new perspectives from people coming from different backgrounds. Finally, we have Principle 14, which is the standards and assessment. Setting appropriately high and challenging standards and assessing the learner as well as learning progress, including diagnostic, process, and outcome assessment, are integral parts of the learning process. Assessment is an essential part of the learning because it provides important information to both the learner and the teacher at all stages of the learning process. Basically, it shows the student's learning progress and whether or not the learning outcomes have been achieved. When students feel challenged to work towards appropriately high goals and standards, effective learning takes place. So thank you all for listening. Remember, a teacher takes a hand, opens a mind, and touches a heart. I'll see you in my next video. Have a nice day.